Marcus leaned against the cold stone wall of the gallery, staring at the ornate doors ahead of him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. This was it, the opportunity he had been waiting for, hoping for. His hands gripped the leather strap of his bag tightly, the artwork inside trembling slightly, as if aware of the fate that might await it. The city buzzed around him, a constant hum of movement and noise. Inside, people with expensive suits and designer dresses roamed the halls, sipping champagne and discussing art like it was a currency. Marcus had never belonged to this world. He had come from humble beginnings, raised in a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. But his art, his passion for it, had always kept him going. The strokes of his paintbrush were his voice, the canvas his only way to express the struggles, dreams, and realities of his life. As he stepped forward, his shoes clicked against the polished marble floor of the gallery's foyer. The space smelled of fresh paint and antique wood, the kind of scent that signaled wealth and history. It felt foreign to him, as if he were walking through someone else's dream. He wasn't used to this level of sophistication, but his work, his paintings, deserved to be seen here. He knew that. Somewhere deep down, he knew. The receptionist looked up from her desk, her eyes scanning Marcus as he approached. She raised an eyebrow. He didn't blame her. His clothes were modest, faded jeans and a simple jacket. No one who mattered in this world dressed like that. Still, he squared his shoulders, walked up to the desk, and cleared his throat. "I'd like to speak with Mr. O'Connell, please. I'm here to show my work." The receptionist's expression faltered. She tried to hide it, but Marcus could tell. He could feel the judgment, the dismissive glance that said it all, "You don't belong here." She typed something into her computer and picked up the phone. A few moments later, she hung up. "Mr. O'Connell is available." "Right this way," she said, motioning to a corridor on the left. Marcus nodded, following her lead, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The gallery was filled with large, stunning pieces, bold strokes of color, surreal landscapes, abstract figures that seemed to come alive with energy. He couldn't help but marvel at the talent on display. But none of it was like his. His work was raw, gritty, filled with emotion, stories painted in the hues of hardship and hope. They arrived at a small office at the end of the corridor. The receptionist knocked lightly on the door and then opened it. "Mr. O'Connell, this is Marcus, the artist I mentioned." Inside, the gallery owner, Jonathan O'Connell, sat behind a large mahogany desk, his fingers steepled as he regarded Marcus. O'Connell was an imposing figure, well-dressed, silver hair neatly combed back, eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that came with years of experience in the art world. He barely looked up at Marcus as he walked in, giving him a cursory glance. "What do you have for me?" O'Connell asked, his tone clipped and uninterested. Marcus placed his bag on the floor and carefully pulled out the first painting, a striking piece that depicted the sharp contrast between light and darkness. It was a portrayal of a city skyline, but one built from pieces of broken glass, with a single ray of sunlight breaking through the cracks. The colors were vivid, splashes of yellow, red, and purple blending with dark blues and grays. It was his heart, laid bare on canvas. O'Connell didn't even bother to stand up as he inspected the piece. He didn't touch it, just scanned it with an air of disinterest, barely giving it more than a few seconds before he sighed. Interesting," O'Connell muttered, his fingers tapping against the desk. "But I don't think this is quite what we're looking for. We specialize in more refined pieces, something with more commercial appeal." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't new. He had heard this before from other gallery owners, other experts in the field who told him his work was too raw, too unpolished, too real. They didn't understand that his art was a reflection of his life, his struggles. But still, he pressed on. "I believe in this work," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the disappointment creeping in. "I think people need to see it. Art doesn't always have to be pretty or refined. Sometimes, it needs to be real." O'Connell raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair. "Real?" He chuckled softly, the sound condescending. Son, art is about selling a vision, about creating something people want to buy. It's not about your feelings. This, he waved his hand dismissively at the painting, is too dark. Too heavy. Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't say anything. He had learned long ago that fighting wasn't worth it. O'Connell wasn't the first to dismiss his art, and he probably wouldn't be the last. Still, it stung. I see, Marcus said, his voice tight. He reached for his next painting, a large, abstract piece filled with bold strokes of red, blue, and black. It was an expression of the tension in society, the conflicts that boiled beneath the surface. He carefully placed it on the desk in front of O'Connell. Again, the gallery owner barely looked at it. Instead, he spun his chair slightly, turning his gaze to the large painting of a serene landscape on the opposite wall. If you really want to make it in this business, you need to understand what people are willing to pay for. You've got talent, but it's wasted on this, raw style. People want beauty, something they can hang in their living rooms without it clashing with their decor. The words were like a slap in the face. But Marcus didn't show it. Instead, he stood up, gathering his paintings and slipping them back into his bag. He had heard it all before, and he wasn't about to beg for recognition. He had something more than just a desire for approval. He had his art, and that was worth more than any gallery's label. I understand, Marcus said, his tone calm and measured. Thank you for your time, Mr. O'Connell. As he turned to leave, O'Connell called after him, Good luck, kid. You'll need it. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The door clicked shut behind him, and the sound echoed through the hallway like a final punctuation mark. He walked out into the cool evening air, the sky above turning from amber to dark purple. The weight of rejection pressed down on him, but there was a spark in his chest, a quiet, burning belief in his work. He had always known it wasn't about the approval of people like O'Connell. His art was bigger than that. It was about the message, about sharing his story with the world. In time, the world would listen. Marcus sat in his small studio apartment, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The space was cluttered with canvases, paint tubes, and brushes strewn across every surface. It was chaotic, much like his mind often was, but it was also where he found solace. Here, in the solitude of his apartment, he could pour out his emotions, frustrations, and dreams onto the canvas. The rejection at O'Connell's gallery still stung. But instead of wallowing in bitterness, Marcus found solace in his work. He painted late into the night, his brushstrokes growing more frantic as he channeled his anger and confusion into his art. Each painting felt like a cathartic release. Yet, somewhere deep down, he still longed for the recognition, the acknowledgement that his work was worth something. He longed to see his paintings hung in prestigious galleries, admired by those who truly understood his vision. But those dreams seemed distant. O'Connell's words echoed in his mind, art is about selling a vision, about creating something people want to buy. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe his work wasn't marketable, wasn't refined enough. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special in what he created. He wasn't just painting to sell, he was painting to speak. And sooner or later, someone would recognize that. Weeks passed, and Marcus continued painting, but he still hadn't received any calls from galleries. It wasn't easy, but he wasn't ready to give up. His art was his voice, and he would keep speaking, whether the world listened or not. Then, out of nowhere, he received an email. It was from an art collector he had never heard of, a name that didn't ring any bells. The subject line was simple. Inquiry about your work. Marcus's heart raced as he opened the email. The collector, a man named Gregory Alden, had seen one of his pieces at a local cafe that had begun displaying works from emerging artists. The email read, Dear Mr. Marcus, I recently came across your work at a cafe here in the city. I must admit, I was captivated by the raw energy and emotion in your paintings. I would like to arrange a meeting to discuss acquiring some of your pieces for my collection. I am particularly interested in the painting titled Fragments of the Forgotten. Please let me know when you're available to meet. Regards, Gregory Alden. Marcus blinked, reading the email again. His hands shook. Could this really be happening? This was it, his first real opportunity. Gregory Alden was an art collector, and he wanted to buy his work. This wasn't some small-time buyer. Alden was known for his deep connections in the art world. The fact that he had found Marcus's art and appreciated it meant more than Marcus could express in words. Marcus quickly typed a response, trying to keep his excitement in check. He arranged a meeting for the next day, unsure of what to expect, but feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The meeting took place in a sleek, minimalist gallery in the heart of the city. It was everything Marcus had imagined, a world far removed from his own. The walls were adorned with expensive pieces from well-known artists, many of whom had long since achieved international acclaim. When Marcus walked in, he was greeted by Gregory Alden, a man in his late 50s with a well-tailored suit and an air of quiet authority. Alden led Marcus into a private room where a few pieces of art were displayed. They sat down, and Marcus was handed a glass of sparkling water. "I've heard a lot about your work, Mr. Marcus," Alden said, his tone polite but firm. "And I must say, I'm intrigued. Fragments of the Forgotten is an incredible piece. The way you capture both chaos and order is unlike anything I've seen before." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected such praise. He had expected more rejection, more doubt from the world. But here was someone who truly understood the intricacies of his art. "I'm glad you like it," Marcus replied, trying to stay calm. "It's a reflection of how I see the world. There's a lot of beauty, but also a lot of brokenness." Alden nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what draws me to it. The complexity, the emotion. It's raw, unrefined, but that's what makes it powerful. I think it's time the world saw your work for what it truly is." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Could this be real? Was Alden really saying what he thought he was? "I'd like to purchase Fragments of the Forgotten," Alden continued. "And I'm also interested in acquiring several more of your pieces. We could discuss terms if you're open to it." The words hung in the air, surreal. This was it. The breakthrough he had been waiting for. Marcus's art was finally being recognized for its true worth. The realization sent a flood of emotions through him, relief, joy, but also disbelief. It was happening. His work was worth something. It wasn't just an expression of his own pain, it had value in the world, real value. They discussed the details of the sale, with Alden agreeing to pay a substantial amount for the pieces. Marcus tried to remain composed, but inside, he was elated. This was just the beginning. This sale would open doors to more opportunities, more people who would see the depth of his work. After the meeting, Marcus left the gallery, feeling like he was walking on air. For the first time, he felt like he belonged in this world. The validation, the recognition, it was more than he had ever dreamed of. And yet, he knew he couldn't stop here. This was just the start. There were still so many stories left to tell, so many emotions to capture on canvas. As he walked home that evening, he thought about everything that had led him to this point. All the rejection, all the dismissals, none of it mattered anymore. He had found someone who believed in him, someone who saw the worth in his work. And this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Alden's purchase made waves in the art community. The sale price was impressive, and soon other collectors began to take notice of Marcus's work. His paintings were being showcased at exclusive events and high-end galleries, their value skyrocketing as more people discovered his unique perspective. Marcus's phone was now constantly ringing with new offers, but he remained grounded, focused on his craft. He hadn't forgotten the days of struggle, the times when his work seemed invisible to the world. He had come from nothing, but now he was building something bigger than himself. As he stood in front of his easel one night, adding the final touches to a new painting, he smiled to himself. The world was finally seeing his art for what it truly was, something valuable, something worth more than gold. And he wasn't done yet. The future, full of endless possibilities, stretched out before him. But for now, he would continue painting, one stroke at a time, knowing that his voice was finally being heard. The art world moved fast, and Marcus had to adjust quickly. His work, now being recognized for its raw power and unique emotional depth, was becoming highly sought after. After the success of his meeting with Gregory Alden, the buzz around Marcus's art grew louder. More collectors were interested, more galleries wanted to showcase his pieces. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next. It was a cold winter afternoon when the call came. Marcus had just finished putting the final touches on a new piece, a landscape of stark contrasts between light and darkness, when his phone buzzed on the workbench. The name on the screen made his heart skip. It was Gregory Alden. "Marcus, I hope you're well," Alden's voice came through the phone, calm and composed as usual. "I have some exciting news. I've arranged for one of your pieces to be showcased at a major art auction next month. The auction house is a high-profile one, and they've seen the success of your work so far. They're eager to feature it. I think this will open up new doors for you." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. An auction? He had heard of the prestigious houses where artwork like his was sold, but he had never imagined his own paintings would be part of such an event. Auction? Marcus repeated, still in disbelief. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that. Alden chuckled softly, a reassuring sound. "You're more than ready, Marcus. Your art has the power to move people. This is the next step in your journey. Trust me." And just like that, the wheels of his future began turning faster. Alden had arranged for two of Marcus's most popular pieces, Fragments of the Forgotten and a new painting he had titled Beneath the Surface, to be auctioned at one of the most well-known houses in the city. The days leading up to the auction were a blur of anticipation. Marcus spent most of his time in his studio, creating new pieces and preparing for the spotlight he knew was coming. He tried to focus on his work, but the thought of his art being sold to the highest bidder, viewed by people with deep pockets and even deeper connections, kept creeping into his mind. It was exciting, yes, but also a little overwhelming. The night of the auction arrived, and Marcus found himself standing in a room filled with the glittering elite of the art world. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, champagne, and polished wood. The walls were adorned with iconic paintings, some of which had fetched tens of millions at past auctions. Marcus couldn't help but feel a bit out of place, despite the elegant black suit Alden had insisted he wear. He wandered through the crowd, nodding politely at the collectors and curators who eyed him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. It was strange to be treated like someone important, like someone who actually mattered in the art world. Not long ago, he had been dismissed by Mr. O'Connell as nothing more than a nobody. Now, here he was, in the heart of the art world, about to see his paintings go on display for some of the wealthiest people in the industry. Alden found him eventually, his ever-composed demeanor offering a quiet reassurance. He led Marcus to a private area where they could watch the auction in peace. "The bids will start high," Alden explained, "but don't get too caught up in the numbers. This is about positioning your work for the future. We'll see where it goes. And remember, it's not just about the money, it's about visibility." Marcus nodded, though he could barely hear him over the pounding of his own heartbeat. The stage was set. The auctioneer stepped onto the podium, a man dressed in a tailored suit, with an air of confidence that came from years of running such events. He flashed a smile at the crowd and raised his gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's auction," the auctioneer began, his voice smooth and practiced. "We have some exceptional works up for bid tonight, and I'm particularly excited to present the first two pieces by an artist who is quickly becoming a force to be reckoned with in the art world, Mr. Marcus." Marcus felt a rush of heat flood his chest. He had made it. His name was being spoken with reverence, his paintings set to change hands for the first time in such a grand setting. He couldn't help but glance at Alden, who gave him a reassuring nod. The first piece, Fragments of the Forgotten, was displayed on a pedestal, illuminated by a single spotlight. The painting, with its broken glass cityscape and sharp contrasts of light and dark, seemed to take on a life of its own under the intense scrutiny of the crowd. The auctioneer raised his hand. "Let's start the bidding for Fragments of the Forgotten at $100,000. A murmur rippled through the room. Marcus's stomach twisted in nervous anticipation. $100,000? That was more than he had ever dreamed of. The auctioneer's voice rang out again, and a bidder in the front row raised his paddle. $150,000, the auctioneer announced. The bids continued to climb, each one sending a shockwave through Marcus's chest. 150, 200,000, then $250,000. The numbers were dizzying, each bid louder than the last. The intensity in the room was palpable, as though the entire space was holding its breath. Finally, after several more bids, Fragments of the Forgotten sold for $500,000. Marcus's jaw dropped. His mind couldn't fully process it. $500,000 for a painting he had created alone, in his small apartment, fueled only by his own struggles and dreams. Alden placed a hand on his shoulder, a look of satisfaction on his face. "Well done, Marcus. You've just crossed into another world." The auction continued, and the next painting, Beneath the Surface, quickly followed. This piece, darker and more somber than the first, also captured the attention of the bidders. The theme of hidden emotions, buried beneath calm exteriors, struck a chord with the audience. The final bid came in at a staggering $350,000. Marcus could hardly believe it. His work was being bought at prices that, only months ago, he had considered impossible. But now, here he was, watching his creations being sold to some of the most powerful figures in the art world. And the best part was, he hadn't had to compromise his vision. This wasn't about creating what people wanted to buy, this was about creating what he needed to express. As the auction drew to a close, Marcus felt a wave of emotion sweep over him. He had done it. His art was now worth something, worth far more than he had ever imagined. He had gone from being dismissed by gallery owners to commanding the attention of some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. The night ended with the clinking of champagne glasses, the buzz of excitement filling the air, and Marcus standing at the center of it all, a quiet sense of triumph settling in his chest. This was just the beginning. The days following the auction were a whirlwind. Marcus had barely processed the staggering prices his paintings had fetched before he found himself thrust into an entirely new world, one filled with high-profile galleries, wealthy collectors, and relentless attention. The success of the auction had opened doors he had never imagined, but it had also brought with it a new set of challenges. It was a crisp morning when Marcus sat down with Gregory Alden for coffee in a sleek, modern cafe. The place had a minimalist design, with black and white art adorning the walls and the soft hum of conversation filling the air. As they sat across from one another, Alden slid a thick folder across the table to Marcus. "Here are the contracts for the next few months," Alden said smoothly. "Several galleries are interested in showcasing your work. We have opportunities for exhibitions in Paris, New York, and London. This is a big step forward, Marcus." Marcus looked at the papers in front of him, a wave of unease crashing over him. It wasn't that he wasn't excited about the prospects, he was, but the weight of it all was overwhelming. He had gone from being a relative unknown to being the talk of the art world in mere weeks. The fame was intoxicating, but it also felt like an alien thing to him. The world he was now part of felt distant from the quiet, solitary life he had known before. "I don't know," Marcus said hesitantly, staring at the contracts. "This is all moving so fast. I've only just started to get used to the idea of being an artist people actually want to buy from. Now it's too much." Alden leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're going to have to get used to it, Marcus. This is the price of success. You can't turn back now. The art world doesn't wait for anyone, and neither will the opportunities." Marcus could feel the pressure mounting. It wasn't just the galleries that were seeking him out, he was being courted by wealthy investors, corporate sponsors, and even celebrities eager to add his work to their private collections. They all saw the value in his art, and they were willing to pay handsomely for it. But Marcus wasn't sure that's what he wanted. The art had always been personal to him, an expression of his inner world, a way to communicate his emotions. But now, it felt as if his art was being commodified, sold to the highest bidder, without much regard for its meaning. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. I didn't become an artist to make money. I did it because I had something to say. I don't want to lose that in all of this. Alden smiled softly, a knowing look in his eyes. I understand, Marcus. And I respect that. But you have to understand this, too, art is a business. The world is your canvas now. You can still create what you want to create, but you'll have to adapt. Artists get to a point where they have to choose. Do they want to be the starving artist, or do they want to be part of a bigger machine that can amplify their voice? The words stung, but Marcus knew Alden was right. He had already stepped into this world, and now there was no turning back. He could either accept the challenges that came with success, or he could fade back into obscurity, struggling to make ends meet. As the meeting wrapped up, Alden left him with the contracts to review and sign. Marcus sat there, staring at the papers in front of him, feeling torn between two worlds. On one hand, there was the allure of fame and fortune, the chance to create on a larger scale, and to reach an audience far beyond his small apartment studio. But on the other hand, there was the fear of losing what had always made his art so meaningful, its authenticity. That evening, Marcus went to his studio. The place had always been his sanctuary, where he could escape from the chaos of the world and focus on what mattered most, his paintings. He spent hours in front of the canvas, but the usual flow of creativity eluded him. His mind kept drifting back to the contracts, the expectations, the pressure to conform. He stepped back from his easel and stared at the half-finished piece in front of him. The colors seemed wrong, the composition unbalanced. It felt as though the painting was a reflection of his inner turmoil. He was lost between the dream of success and the fear of losing himself in the process. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a message from his old friend, Lila, who had been a constant source of support during his earlier days of struggle. Lila, I heard about the auction. That's incredible, Marcus. You're really doing it. A small smile tugged at Marcus's lips as he typed a reply. Marcus, thanks. It's a lot to take in. He sat back down, his phone still in his hand. Lila had always been there, back when his work had no value beyond his own eyes, back when he was rejected by galleries and ignored by critics. But now, with the world watching him, he didn't know how to feel. It was like he was no longer the same person. He had become a product, a brand, a commodity. That night, Marcus went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind raced with thoughts of the future, of gallery shows, media attention, and art collectors bidding for his work. He had worked so hard for this moment, but now that it was here, he couldn't help but wonder if it had all come at too high a price. Was this what he truly wanted? Or was he losing sight of the very thing that had inspired him to paint in the first place? The next day, Marcus made a decision. He would sign the contracts. He would embrace the success, but he wouldn't allow it to define him. His art was still his, and he would continue to create what was meaningful to him, regardless of the pressure to conform to the expectations of others. He met with Alden again, this time with a new sense of resolve. The contracts were signed, the deals made. He was officially part of the art world in a way he never could have imagined. But as he left the gallery that day, a sense of uncertainty lingered in his chest. He had taken the first step into a new chapter of his life. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with both rewards and sacrifices. But he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't lose sight of his purpose, his vision. The art had to remain true to himself, no matter what. The days blurred together after Marcus signed the contracts. The pace of his life had shifted dramatically, and with it, so had his sense of self. The moment he agreed to join the art world on a grand scale, he knew he was taking a risk, but he didn't fully understand how deeply it would alter his world. Fame was a double-edged sword. On one hand, there were the rewards, money, recognition, and the promise of a legacy. On the other hand, there was the constant pressure to perform, to create not just art, but a persona that fit the image the world had of him. Weeks passed since the auction, and Marcus found himself becoming a fixture in high society art events. Invitations to exclusive parties arrived daily, each one more extravagant than the last. Critics and collectors praised his work, but there was always a part of him that felt like he was losing something in the process, something precious that could never be regained. He had just wrapped up his first solo exhibition in Paris, one of the most prestigious galleries in the world. The exhibition was a triumph, sold-out crowds, collectors fighting for his pieces, and glowing reviews from the international art press. The numbers on his bank account had swollen to a point where he could no longer keep track, and yet, it didn't bring him the peace he had hoped for. As the final evening of the exhibition unfolded, Marcus stood at the back of the gallery, his eyes scanning the crowd. The people around him seemed like they were made of glass, polished, perfect, but detached from reality. They admired the art as if it were a trophy, something to be owned and displayed, rather than something that came from the heart and soul of the artist. A group of wealthy patrons approached him, their eyes fixed on the newest pieces hanging in the gallery. One of them, a sharply dressed woman in her 40s, with platinum blonde hair and a knowing smile, offered her hand. "Mr. Marcus, your work is truly magnificent," she said, her voice dripping with charm. "We've all been waiting for you to take the world by storm. Your style is so unique, so daring." Marcus smiled politely, shaking her hand. "Thank you. It's always been my goal to push boundaries, to make people feel something deeper." The woman's eyes flicked over to one of his larger pieces, a sprawling landscape of broken cities and looming figures. "This one in particular," she said, her finger tracing the air above the canvas. "It speaks of revolution, of destruction, of change. It's bold, but I feel like it needs a bit more refinement. Perhaps a little more accessibility, don't you think?" Marcus's stomach tightened. "I think its message is clear as it is," he said carefully, trying to keep his voice neutral. She nodded, but there was an air of condescension in her gaze. "Of course. But art must be adaptable, must evolve with the times. You'll see, Marcus, when your work becomes more mainstream, people will want something easier to digest. Something less difficult." The words struck Marcus like a slap. He felt his jaw tighten, his body stiffen. It wasn't the first time someone had implied that his work was too intense, too raw. But hearing it from a collector who now had his pieces in her collection stung more than he expected. He excused himself from the conversation, his mind racing. Less difficult. The phrase repeated itself in his head, over and over, gnawing at him. Was he really becoming too difficult? Was his art too much for the world to handle? Later that evening, as the gallery emptied out and the last of the guests trickled out into their limousines, Marcus retreated to his hotel room, his mind heavy with doubt. He had worked so hard to be seen, to be acknowledged as an artist who didn't conform, someone who could tell stories through his paint that others were too afraid to tell. But now, it seemed like that same authenticity was being questioned. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he picked up his phone and stared at it for a long moment before texting Lila. "Marcus, do you ever think it's too much? The fame, the pressure to be someone you're not?" A few minutes later, Lila's reply came through. "Lila, I think you're exactly who you need to be. People who matter will see that. Don't let the ones who want to change you win. Your art is yours." Marcus smiled faintly at the message. Lila always knew what to say, even when he wasn't sure himself. But that wasn't enough to silence the voice in his head. The world he was part of, the one he had longed for, was becoming a foreign place to him. He wasn't sure he belonged anymore. The next morning, Marcus took a walk through the streets of Paris to clear his head. The crisp air bit at his skin as he strolled down the wide avenues, his thoughts clouded by the demands of the art world. The people he passed by seemed so focused on their own lives, their own problems, unaware of the turmoil inside him. It was a strange feeling to walk among them. He had never been a part of the crowd, but now, he felt more like an outsider than ever before. He stopped in front of a small cafe and sat at a table outside, watching the world move around him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it for the moment. He needed space to think, to breathe. He realized that for the first time in months, he didn't have the answer to the question that had been plaguing him since the auction: is this really what I wanted? As he sat there, a few people passed by, each one admiring the small cafe's artwork. One painting caught his eye, an abstract piece, simple in design, but full of energy. It was a stark contrast to the overpolished, commercially driven art that had filled his Paris exhibition. There was something pure about it, something raw. He felt a stirring deep in his chest. He took out his phone and snapped a picture of the piece. For the first time in a long while, he felt inspired again. Maybe it wasn't about the fame. Maybe it was about finding that spark within himself again, the same spark that had driven him to paint in the first place. Later that day, Marcus called Alden and asked for a break, a brief hiatus from the exhibitions, the auctions, and the overwhelming demands. He needed time to recalibrate, to find his artistic voice once again. Alden was understanding, though not without a trace of disappointment. "I understand, Marcus. You've earned this time off. But you know the world won't wait for you. When you return, the opportunities will be waiting, but you'll have to be ready to face them." Marcus nodded. "I'll be ready. I just need to find myself again." The days stretched into weeks as Marcus took a step back from the whirlwind of art shows, press tours, and private collectors. He spent most of his time in his studio, away from the spotlight, wrestling with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he wasn't painting for anyone but himself. He wasn't painting to please the critics, to impress the buyers, or to create something that could be sold for millions. He was painting to rediscover his purpose, to reconnect with the very thing that had driven him to pick up a paintbrush in the first place. His studio had become a sanctuary, a place of quiet contemplation. His latest canvas sat in front of him, untouched for days, but slowly, he began to feel the pull of inspiration once again. It wasn't the grandeur of success that had fueled him before, nor the need for validation from the art world. It was something deeper, something more primal. The feeling that he had a story to tell, and only he could tell it. As he dipped his brush into the thick, vibrant paint, Marcus found himself immersed in a new kind of peace. He wasn't thinking about how the piece would be received, nor about how much it might sell for. He was simply expressing his thoughts and feelings, painting the chaos in his mind, the peace in his soul, the beauty he saw in the world. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. It was on one of these quiet afternoons that Marcus received a message from an unexpected source, Gregory Alden. The text was brief, but the words struck a chord with Marcus. "I heard you're taking some time off. Just wanted to check in. I know this can be a lot to process. Remember, the art world moves fast, but your voice is unique. Don't lose it in the noise." Marcus smiled faintly, touched by Alden's message. It wasn't the typical corporate advice he was used to hearing from his agent, but there was something genuine in it. Alden had seen his potential, had guided him through the early days of his career, but now, it seemed like Alden was acknowledging that the artist within Marcus needed room to breathe, too. For the first time, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude. He had been so focused on the pressure to succeed, the expectations of the industry, that he had forgotten that art was a deeply personal journey. And now, he was beginning to understand that it was okay to take a step back, to take the time to rediscover what made his work meaningful. One afternoon, while sitting in his studio, Marcus reflected on how far he had come. He thought about his humble beginnings, how he had painted on scraps of canvas, using cheap brushes and leftover paints. Back then, he had no guarantees of success, no promises of fame or fortune. He painted because he had no other choice. It was his way of surviving, of expressing what he couldn't put into words. But now, as he stood in his spacious studio, surrounded by fine art supplies and a reputation that stretched across the globe, he realized how much he had changed. Success had brought him luxuries he had once dreamed of, comfortable living, opportunities to travel the world, and the ability to create without fear of financial ruin. But it had also come with its own set of challenges, most notably the pressure to conform, to make art that could be marketed and sold. He had lost sight of his original purpose, and that was something he needed to find again. One evening, Marcus took a break from his paintings and decided to go for a walk in the park. The cool evening air was refreshing, and the sound of rustling leaves soothed his frayed nerves. As he walked, his thoughts began to shift. He realized that he didn't need to abandon everything he had built. Fame and success didn't have to be enemies of authenticity. He just needed to find a way to balance both, to use his platform to share his voice, while staying true to the very essence of what had made him an artist in the first place. As he walked further, he came across an art exhibit in the park, a small, temporary display of local artists. The works were simple but powerful, and they immediately struck a chord with Marcus. One particular piece, a minimalist sculpture made from reclaimed wood, spoke to him in a way that no other work had in months. It was raw, imperfect, and yet, it conveyed a deep sense of truth. Marcus took a moment to appreciate the piece, then pulled out his phone to snap a picture. As he did, the artist, a young woman in her 20s, with dark, curly hair, approached him. "I see you like my work," she said with a smile. "What do you think of it?" Marcus looked at the sculpture again. "It's incredible," he said honestly. "There's something so pure about it. It's not trying to be anything more than what it is." The young woman nodded. "That's exactly what I was going for. I think art should be real, you know? People want perfection, but I think imperfection is what makes art meaningful." Her words resonated with Marcus deeply. He had been so focused on perfection, on creating something that would be admired, something that would sell. But the truth was, his most meaningful work had never been perfect. It had always been raw, imperfect, and full of emotion. The young artist had reminded him of that. "You've really made me think," Marcus said, smiling. "I've been caught up in the idea of what people expect from me, but I think it's time I just focus on making art that's true to me." The woman grinned. "That's the best kind of art, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. True art. The thought echoed in his mind like a mantra. He didn't need to please anyone but himself. If people loved his work, that would be the bonus, not the goal. As he left the park that evening, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't need to fit into the mold of the commercial art world. He didn't need to cater to the highest bidder or follow trends. He needed to create from his heart, with honesty, passion, and truth. In the days that followed, Marcus poured himself into his art with a newfound freedom. The pressure to create for others slowly faded, and in its place, there was a clarity he had been missing for so long. The path ahead wasn't easy, he knew that, but it was his path, and that was enough. He had found his way back to the heart of his work, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and Marcus's life began to take on a new rhythm. The pressure from the art world had softened, not because it had disappeared, but because he had learned to embrace it on his own terms. He had taken the time he needed to reconnect with his passion, and in doing so, he had rediscovered something invaluable, his true artistic voice. He spent his days painting in the studio, free from the constraints of commercial expectations. His canvases had become more introspective, more personal, yet somehow more universally resonant. The world around him was still full of noise, still full of people who wanted to buy and own his work, but he no longer felt like he was drowning in it. Instead, he stood tall, fully aware of the choices he was making, and proud of the art he was creating. One evening, while working on a large piece that reflected his experiences over the past year, the struggles, the growth, the challenges of fame, his phone buzzed. It was an email from a curator at a prestigious museum in New York. The subject line read, "Invitation to showcase your work at the Museum of Modern Art." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The email was an official invitation, not for a gallery show, but for a major exhibition at one of the most renowned museums in the world. His work, displayed alongside some of the most influential artists of the decade. It was an opportunity he had never dared to dream of, and yet here it was, unfolding before him. He sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This was the moment that every artist dreamed of, a chance to cement his place in history. But as he stared at the email, Marcus felt a sense of calm wash over him. He no longer viewed success as the pinnacle of fame or fortune. It wasn't about recognition, or prestige, or the validation of others. Success, to Marcus, had become something entirely different. It was about staying true to himself and using his work as a vehicle for personal expression. He replied to the curator, graciously accepting the invitation, but with one condition: the exhibition would include not only his newer works but also a selection of his earlier pieces, those raw, unrefined works from his struggling days. It was important to him that the museum understood the full arc of his artistic journey, from the depths of obscurity to the heights of recognition. His story wasn't just about the art he had created, it was about the person he had become through the process. As the months leading up to the exhibition passed, Marcus continued to paint with the same freedom he had found in his break from the art world. The pressure to create for anyone but himself had disappeared entirely. His work became a reflection of his soul, every stroke of the brush, every color choice, an extension of his innermost thoughts and feelings. The exhibition was an overwhelming success, but not in the way that Marcus had once imagined. The media coverage was there, the critics came, and the collectors once again fought for his pieces. But what mattered to him most was the response from the people who visited the museum, not the elite patrons or the wealthy art buyers, but the everyday people who stood before his work and felt something real. One afternoon, as Marcus was standing near his most recent piece, a large, chaotic canvas filled with intense color and motion, a young girl approached him. She couldn't have been more than 15, with bright eyes and an energy that reminded him of himself when he first picked up a paintbrush. "I just wanted to say, your work is amazing," she said, her voice full of sincerity. It's like you can feel all the emotions in it. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like you're showing your heart." Marcus's heart swelled at her words. This was what it was all about. Not the accolades, not the $1 million sales, not the glitz of the art world. This connection, this raw, unfiltered communication between artist and viewer, was the true reward. "You get it," Marcus said softly, kneeling to her level. "That's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to show my heart." The girl smiled brightly, then walked away, clearly moved by the experience. Marcus stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. He had done it. He had managed to stay true to himself, and in doing so, he had created something that touched others. That, he realized, was the true definition of success. In the years that followed, Marcus continued to paint. His reputation only grew, but he no longer allowed it to dictate his work. His exhibitions became less about making a statement to the world and more about sharing his personal journey with those who were willing to listen. He built a new kind of legacy, one that was not based on accolades or fame, but on the authenticity of his voice. Marcus never forgot the lesson he had learned along the way: success isn't about being the most famous or the richest artist. It's about being the most true to yourself. It was a lesson that he carried with him every day, and one that he shared with other young artists who, like him, had dreams of making it big. As he walked through his studio on a quiet evening, looking over the paintings that lined the walls, Marcus realized that he had found his own path, one that was uniquely his, shaped by his experiences, his struggles, and his triumphs. He had made peace with the world around him, not by conforming to its expectations, but by redefining success on his own terms. And that, he knew, was worth more than any gallery show, any auction, or any price tag.